This morning, the sermon's going to be a little bit different. The sermon this morning, the title is Science and the Bible. Science and the Bible. I want you to just quickly turn to 1 Timothy chapter 6, starting verse 20. And the Bible reads, O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings, and oppositions of science falsely so called, which some professing have erred concerning the faith. Grace be with thee. Amen. Here the Bible, in this letter written to Timothy from Paul the Apostle, it brings up this term of science falsely so called. And he warns Timothy about this science falsely so called. What that means is there's obviously false science and there's true science. Now, what I'm going to preach about this morning is the Bible only contains accurate scientific information. You will not find any false scientific information in this book. If you find something that's seemingly contradictory, I'm going to say this: whoever the scientist is that's purporting, propagating whatever information it might be, they're wrong. The Bible's right. And what we're going to see in this sermon this morning is quite often, over the course of history, it has taken a while for science to catch up to the Bible. It's not like we make these amazing scientific discoveries before the prophets write about them. No, the prophets have written so many scientific facts in this book, hundreds, sometimes thousands of years ahead of the scientists and modern scientists discovering that they're actually factual, that they can be proven using mathematics or logic. And that's what we're going to see this morning. And in John 17, verse 17, the Bible says, Jesus says, sanctify them through thy truth. Thy word is truth. Now, primarily, we use the Bible to create doctrines and teach doctrines that are usually about morality and how we ought to live, about salvation, about the nature of God, usually a lot of spiritual matters. We don't often use the Bible to teach doctrines about, so much, the laws of nature and the laws that govern the universe and whatnot. Yet the Bible does contain these teachings and these statements that marry up with scientific facts. Like when they're put under scrutiny, scientific scrutiny, using observation, they're found to be accurate and true. Now, quite often it's only with modern science that we're able to actually find out some of these things. And sometimes it's through trial and error. But we just read from Matthew 19. And in Matthew 19 and verse 4, Jesus is speaking, says, and he answered and said unto them, have ye not read? This term that Jesus uses here, it appears at least, I think it's 6 times in the Gospel of Matthew, but many times in the Gospels. A number of times Jesus uses this phrase, have ye not read? Now, obviously the reason he's saying this is because when we're reading the Bible, we're reading truth. Thy word is truth. Jesus, when he's referencing the Old Testament scriptures, he's referencing truth. He's telling his disciples, he's telling his followers, when he's making these teachings, he's saying, have you not read? Meaning, you've got access to this. We have access to this knowledge. It's in his word. So any scientific truth, we do have access to it through his word. Even if we might not understand how it works, we might not know all the ins and outs, especially when it comes to microbiology, all these sorts of different things about the creation, we can trust the Bible, even if we are a little bit ignorant on some of these matters. Now, I'm not professing to be some wise scientist up here this morning. I'm not. I don't have a degree in any kind of scientific field whatsoever, but I do know this, and I know this is true. And from what I can gather and what I have gathered through studying, scientific discoveries and whatnot, which we're going to go through this morning, is that the Bible is absolutely accurate. Now, there's lots of different fields of science, There's also the field of archaeology, which also confirms the Bible. Lots of different fields of science. But the Bible also contains miracles. So not just scientific facts, but miracles. Now, by definition, a miracle is something that cannot be explained scientifically. That's the point. Now, you've got some people that, they're in this camp of, I'm into science, so I don't believe the Bible. And there's almost like they make out like there's this tug of war between the Bible and science. It's just not true. It's just false. The Bible is a scientific book, which also contains miracles. And the Bible's very clear that they are miracles. It's not claiming that they're scientific, but this is the whole point. Could you imagine, probably the greatest miracle in the Bible is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's not normal for a man to come back from the dead. It is supernatural. That's the point. If every miracle could be explained scientifically, where's the power of God, right? This is the point of these miracles. It's not like science versus the Bible. No, science works with the Bible, but the fact that there are miracles should make people pause and think, what is going on here? How can someone come back from the dead? That's the point of it being outside the bounds of science, being a miracle. So the Bible is a book of facts. The miracles are a fact. They happened. Like, these are events that took place in the Bible. The parting of the Red Sea, Jesus raising from the dead, Jesus raising others from the dead, Jesus healing the sick, the lame. All these miracles, the miracle of creation itself. All of these miracles the Bible accurately describes. But when it comes to the nature of creation itself, when the Bible's making statements about the nature of the universe and the laws of nature, they are accurate scientifically. They don't need to be explained by miracles because we can observe them day to day. Yeah. Something that you're not going to see happen every day is somebody come back from the dead. But things that you will see day to day are just things that are observable through just real science, through real observation. And the first thing I want to look at is the origin of life. Right? So when we're talking about science in the Bible, let's look at the origin of life. And in 1869, the molecule that we now call DNA was first discovered. Now, depending on what literature you read, right, and this is why we've got to be really careful, about this science that's falsely so called. There is a lot of scientific literature out there on this particular topic, on this subject. But you know what I'm going to read? I'm going to read the literature or the material that lines up with the Word of God, because it's accurate. Now, here's the thing, just because there is scientific books and texts out there that do sort of align themselves with creation and the Bible's record, that doesn't mean they're 100% accurate either. Only this is 100% accurate. You can find false statements even in those sorts of books and those sorts of texts. But when it comes to the DNA, and in Genesis 1:26, the Bible reads, "And God said, let us make man in our image, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them." So we're a creation of God. We're not some random cosmic accident. And when it comes to the study of DNA, modern studies are now proving the fact that we had these ancestors, and not that long ago. So not the hundreds of thousands of years ago. Modern science would sort of teach or lead you to believe that, over the last 200,000 years, modern man has existed. And this is obviously, when you look at the theory of evolution, which is just total garbage. But when you do look at that and you look at the hundreds of thousands of years where they teach that man evolved from an ape, modern studies of DNA are now proving this to just be false. Because when they look at the mutations in what's called the mtDNA, which MT is short for mitochondrial DNA, and what you would expect to see as far as the number of mutations if mankind really was this old, you would expect to see something like more than 2,000 mutations in the mtDNA, and that's just in modern man. That's just for the past 180,000 or 200,000 years. With the creation side, where it's like less than 6,200 years, give or take, to 6,250, what you would expect to see is somewhere between 30 to 115. What we actually see in the mtDNA lines up with that. It's between 53 to 103. It's exactly what you would expect. Now, this is only available to us in modern times with modern technology, with being able to look at a microscopic level at the DNA. This is a fact. And here's where science is catching up to the Bible, right? Now, some science before this real modern microbiology would, when you look at the 1800s and 1900s, started to, Darwin introducing this theory of evolution drew people away from God. But now as technology develops, the science is once again catching up with the Bible and just proving how fraudulent that theory is, especially when it comes to DNA. Let's look at what the Bible says about other things about the creation itself. The earth. So go to Isaiah chapter 40. Isaiah chapter 40. Now this is written approximately 2,800 years ago. So I've got before we go there, I've just got a picture here. You might be able to see that, you might be able to not. But over here, this is the number of mutations you'd expect if evolution were to be true over hundreds of thousands of years of modern man. There's the creation predicted number down here. That's the actual. So these two line up, the theory of evolution. And it gets worse for the evolutionists because they've got to go back millions and millions of years. It gets worse. But let's have a look at Isaiah chapter 40, verse 22. And this was written about 2,800 years ago. It is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants thereof are as grasshoppers, that stretcheth out the heavens as a curtain, and spreadeth them out as a tent to dwell in. So notice it's the circle of the earth. It's not flat, it's a circle, which means any angle you look at the earth, you're going to see a circle because it's spherical. It doesn't matter what angle you look at the earth. Whether if you were in outer space somewhere, it wouldn't matter what point you were at in space looking at the earth, it's going to look like a circle. And that's what the Bible teaches. We know that. We know that. But this was only first recognized about 2,300 to 2,400 years ago. So this is 400 years after the prophet Isaiah has written this down. Now, I dare say their inspiration to make this discovery came from the scriptures. So Isaiah writes this down about 400 years previous. There it is. It's in the Holy Scriptures. Everybody's had access to it for 4 centuries reading it. And then it's confirmed. Now, how they confirm this is, I don't know if you've ever witnessed a lunar eclipse, but this is basically where the earth passes between the sun and the moon, right? So the earth's shadow is cast on the moon, right? Because the earth is moving in front of the sun, between the sun and the moon, and the earth blocks the light of the sun and starts creating a shadow on the moon, and you see the circular outside of the earth move across the moon. This is how it was confirmed. And at the same time, and there's a couple of Greek philosophers and whatnot, Greek scholars that were cited and potentially the discoverers of this, but it was around about that time, whether it be Pythagoras or there's another gentleman, I don't think I wrote down his name, but one of those two men. And the other thing that was discovered also obviously at the same time is that the earth is obviously free floating in space. And this is written in Job 26 verse 7. Now this is even more ancient. This is 3,500 years ago. He stretcheth out the north over the empty place and hangeth the earth upon nothing. Now we know that it's gravity that acts as a force to keep the earth in its place. But when you're looking at it, if you were looking at it from outer space, that's what you'd see. You just see this circle just sitting in space, just out there in space, just hanging in space, exactly as it's described in Job. Now, there are plenty of scientists throughout history that because of their belief in God, now they might not have been saved. I don't know what gospel these men believed. I'm going to use Isaac Newton as an example. So he used the Bible as like a reference point, a bit of an anchor, if you will, his belief in God, which helped him have a foundation that if there's a creation and it's ordered, there has to be laws that govern the creation and the universe, which are observable and provable And this is what led Newton to his law of gravity. Because he had the mindset, there's a God, there's got to be laws, it's got to be ordered, it can't just be chaotic, especially with what I observe. Therefore, I'm going to try and figure out and prove mathematically some of these laws. And the law of gravity was one of those things that Newton discovered. Now, that's not to say he was saved. I don't know. I don't think so. As far as I can tell from what I read, he denied the deity of Jesus Christ. So I doubt he was saved. Unless that changed at some point before he died, who knows? But that didn't stop him from making some great scientific discoveries, which the Bible already describes. Countless stars, Jeremiah 33, Jeremiah chapter 33. Now, they didn't have, 2,500 years ago, they didn't have the powerful telescopes that we have today. So when they observed the stars in the night sky, they were very limited with what they could see and how many they could count. Now, in Jeremiah 33, verse 22, the Bible reads, "As the host of heaven cannot be numbered, neither the sand of the sea measured, so will I multiply the seed of David, my servant, and the Levites that minister unto me." So, at the time that this was written, what was visible to the naked eye was around about 1,100 stars in the night sky that could be counted. And in fact, they were catalogued by a man by the name of Ptolemy. And because that was what was observable at the time, they didn't have, like I said, they didn't have the powerful telescopes we have today. Now, God's saying they can't be numbered. He numbered them. Now, think about this. They didn't have this access that we have today. We've got this, what's called this James Webb telescope, which is in orbit around the Earth, which can see light years into the universe, thousands, hundreds of thousands of light years into the universe. And it's estimated, this is mind-boggling, just our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, and it's estimated that it contains somewhere between 100 and 400 billion stars. So they can't even properly number just the stars just in our galaxy, right? It's an estimation. And that's just one galaxy. It's estimated that there's between 100 and 200 billion galaxies. So if you multiply 100 billion by 100, even on the low end of the scale, it's an astronomical number. They can't be numbered. Now, this is modern days that we're aware of this. It's only in modern times. Yet here's the Bible, 3,500 years, telling us, saying, God is saying then they can't be numbered. But they numbered them back in the day. Now, there would have been some people that were like, but hold on, we've numbered them. What position? They might have lost their faith, right? God's saying we can't number them, but we've numbered them. But here's the thing. This is where it takes time sometimes for science to catch up to the divine. They had this divine knowledge, access to it through God, through the scriptures. Now, when it comes to this, because it is so vast, the universe is so vast. Now, I don't know if you're aware, a lot of you probably are aware. The speed of light travels at a certain speed. It's a constant speed that it travels at. It's extremely fast speed. I can't even recite the number, but it's a large number. It travels quickly, okay? Now, because the universe is so big and the light travels at a certain speed, there's a lot of people that would argue, well, the universe must be billions and billions of years old because it takes that long for the light to reach Earth. Like the universe just has to be this old. But see, when you read the Bible, you'll learn something, because when it comes to the chronology of the creation itself, so when it comes to specifically the creation of the stars, the sun, and the moon, Genesis 1, verse 3. Now in verse 3 in Genesis chapter 1, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. This is on day one of creation. You're not going to find the stars, the sun, and the moon created until day 3. And this is creation. He's creating the light. So this isn't his own light. We know that God is light and in him is no darkness. This is the creation. He's creating light and he's separating the light from darkness as it teaches in Genesis 1. That's in verse 3. If you read, I'm not going to read it all, but if you read further down in Genesis, you'll see the creation of the sun, moon, and stars, day 3. So what light is God creating? He's creating all that light that we can see from these stars, these distant galaxies and suns. That's what's happening. So yeah, it has an appearance of age. And you know what? For me, the way I look at it, it's just another stumbling block for the non-believers. You know, the problem with the people that choose not to believe on the Bible, believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and seek forgiveness, it's not an intellectual problem, it's a heart problem. What we're looking at here, all we're looking at is just confirmation of the Bible being true. But I don't need that. Just like the people thousands of years ago, when they numbered the stars, yet the Bible's saying they can't be numbered, people still believed. And it's not until later on we find out, no, they can't be numbered. God's right. And it's going to be the same with other things in the Bible as well. If you encounter something in the Bible that just doesn't quite marry up with science, the science hasn't yet caught up with it. That's all it is. We just lack the understanding. In the book of Daniel, it talks about knowledge increasing in the latter times. Now, I don't know if that's just prophetic knowledge, or is that just more wisdom and understanding? Is that scientific knowledge? I think it's probably a bit of both. But knowledge increasing is definitely something we're seeing in modern times. But sometimes you've got to look for it as well. There's a lot of garbage out there. There's a lot of falsehoods, science falsely so-called, especially in textbooks that are taught in universities and schools. But truth begins here with the Word of God. This is where it begins. Let's have a look at what science calls the first law of thermodynamics. Now, this is also called the law of conservation of energy and or mass. And what this law states in scientific terms is that matter nor energy can be either created or destroyed. So what that means is within the universe itself, it's a closed system. Nothing comes in, nothing goes out. So even with a nuclear explosion where the atoms get split, the matter doesn't cease to exist. It just exists in a different form, okay? So it can't be created or destroyed. And in Genesis chapter 2, verse 1, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. The creation was finished. What we see in the observable universe on earth and the creation itself, God's finished it. He is not adding or taking away from that creation. Now, there are people that are born and die throughout the creation, but there's still not matter or energy created nor destroyed. It's just transferred, transformed. The total energy and mass that's within the universe is not changing. And so when God said it's finished, he really means, yeah, it's finished. Now, there's a lot of things to happen. There's a lot of events to take place. And there will be a new heavens and a new earth, but that's supernatural. Once again, that's a miracle, just like the first creation. So there's no further creation happening today. We cannot create matter. We can only manipulate existing matter or energy. Second law of thermodynamics. And this is also the law of increasing entropy, which states, in all physical processes, every ordered system over time tends to become more disordered. So we start with a lot of order with the creation, and things break down over time, according to this law. So everything's running down or wearing out. Less energy is becoming available for use over time. Matter doesn't cease to exist, but the actual use of it as energy deteriorates. So the universe will eventually wear out, right? Now, this wasn't discovered in modern science until about 1850, yet let's read from the Bible, Psalm 102, verse 25. Of old hast thou laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of thy hands. They shall perish, but thou shalt endure. Yea, all of them shall wax old like a garment. As a vesture shalt thou change them, and they shall be changed. So the Bible's here, God's talking about the work of his hands, which are the heavens and the foundation of the earth, waxing old like a garment, wearing out, which lines up with the second law of thermodynamics, that things wear down in the universe. They don't become more ordered, they become more disordered over time. So that's like the cosmos, right? We've just looked at like stars and the cosmos. Now, some of this might just be beyond you, I don't know. I have an interest in some of this stuff. I like being aware of these things. And especially when, sometimes questions might arise with work colleagues or with friends, people that are not saved, and they might bring up these sorts of things. Now, just refuting them or debunking them is not going to get them saved. We understand that. Ultimately, it's just the gospel that saves. That's what has the power to save. Jesus Christ's death, burial, and resurrection. Getting into arguments and debates with people about these sorts of things, it's not going to save them. But in some cases, what it can do, though, is give you a bit more of an opening. It can just open that door ajar to have the opportunity to give them the gospel. Because they might be surprised by some of these scientific facts that are in the Bible, that they were written hundreds and thousands of years ago, that they're not aware of. They're probably ignorant of this. Especially, now think of this, right? The Bible describes our salvation, like us when we're saved, as overcoming the world. If you've believed on Jesus Christ, you have overcome the world. Now, what does that entail? Overcoming the world, what that tells me is everything in the world is geared against you believing on Jesus. From false religion, right through to science falsely so called. There's all these different things at work against you believing on Jesus Christ in this world. So if you have placed all your faith in Jesus, you have overcome the deception in this world. Satan is the prince of this world, the prince of darkness. He's the father of lies, and that's why we have science falsely so called. So I wanted to make that point because I don't want us to be getting in debates and arguments with people over these things. The aim of this sermon is just to show you, hey, look, the Bible is a scientifically accurate book. You can trust it. You can rely on it. Oceanography. So actually, let's look at the hydrologic cycle, which is hydrology. In Amos chapter 9, now I know Pastor Kevin did preach on this a while ago. So I'll just go through, we'll try and go through this really quickly here. Amos chapter, now we've been reading through Amos on Wednesday night. Pastor's been preaching through Amos. In Amos chapter 9, verse 6. So this is written about 2,800 years ago. It reads, "It is he that buildeth his stories in the heaven and hath founded his troop in the earth. He that calleth for the waters of the sea and poureth them out upon the face of the earth. The Lord is his name." So the Bible's describing this cycle that happens with the water here, that God calls out the waters of the sea. So you think about all the oceans that are full of water. God calls them out and pours them out upon the face of the earth. So this is that cycle of evaporation, and that vapor goes up into the clouds. It's stored up in the clouds, and then it comes back down on the earth again. And in Psalm 135:7, it reads, "He causeth the vapors to ascend from the ends of the earth. He maketh lightnings for the rain. He bringeth forth the wind out of his treasuries." So that's that cycle of water, like where it goes and where it comes from. Remember how I said, like, the universe is a closed system? In the same way, the earth with its atmosphere is a closed system. All of the water that exists inside our atmosphere, the volume of it, never changes. It can change form, it can go between liquid and vapor, but it's within that atmosphere, it's a closed system. So whatever volume of water we've got within our atmosphere, it's never going to change. It can move around. And that's what the Bible's describing here. It's movement, the movement of this water. Ecclesiastes 1:7, "All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place from whence the rivers come, thither they return again." So you think about these rivers, and there's thousands of them on earth that transport hundreds of thousands of litres, gallons of water. In fact, the Mississippi River dumps 6 million gallons of water per second into the Gulf of Mexico. That's a crazy volume of water. Where does it all go? As the Bible describes, it's that cycle where it's evaporated from the ocean up into the clouds, comes back down, falls on those mountains, which runs down into these rivers, that cycle. Now, this was not fully understood until the 17th century. How did the prophets, how did Amos know about this? Do you think he was some great scientist that was, 2,600 years ahead of his time? No. It was just divinely given to him from God. That's how he had such knowledge. This is what I love about the Bible, just how accurate it is with its scientific statements. And this is why when it comes to when it comes to your salvation, which is a miracle, which cannot be explained scientifically, like Jesus says, it's like the wind, the Spirit's like the wind. You don't know where it's coming from, where it's going from. Nobody can look at you as an individual and scientifically say, as part of some sort of observational experiment, yeah, that guy's saved. Yeah, I know you're saved, Jordan. I'm gonna perform a scientific experiment to prove that your soul is saved, that you've been cleansed of all your sins. It can't be done. It's not observable like the things that we're looking at here, right? That's the miracle side, right? The unseen, the spiritual side of things. Oceanography. Psalm chapter 8, verse 8. Once again, this is 2,800 years old. The fowl of the air and the fish of the sea and whatsoever passeth through the paths of the seas. So the sea is just like this huge mass of water, right? How can it have paths? The Bible's saying that the sea has paths. Like, we know what a path is. Like, if you've got a path that you can see and walk along, right, that's a path. Usually it's something that might be paved. You can have paths that go through forests, nature reserves, or whatever. It's clear, it's obvious, you can see it. Not so much with the sea currents. They're below the surface of the water. They're not really visible, yet there they are. And fish, like it's talking about, the fish move through these paths. But here's the thing, so do boats. They travel on these currents that go all the way around the earth and around the ocean. And man only really discovered the ocean currents in the 1850s. So they made use of them with boats, but they just didn't understand that there were actual currents that move around. And, fish and sea life and what might migrate using these currents. It's just one of those. And here's the Bible, well ahead of its time again. Let's look at some biology. So the blood. Let's have a look at the blood. Leviticus chapter 17. Leviticus chapter 17. Verse 11. So the Bible describes blood here as being the source of life. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that maketh an atonement for the soul. So when it comes to blood, it was up until as recently as 200 years ago, sick people were bled. They would bleed out sick people. Now, due to this practice, many people died through this practice. But partly that's probably too because they just didn't have the advances in medical science that we have today to keep these people alive and cure them and whatnot. So they went to some desperate measures. But we now know blood is the source of life, and it carries the water and nourishment to every cell in the body. It carries oxygen to the brain. It maintains the body's vital organs and just everything within the body. If you lose your blood, you're going to lose your life. You can't live without your blood. I mean, to me, you'd think that's pretty obvious, right? Like if somebody gets stabbed to death and they just bleed out, they eventually die. But scientifically, the science realm just really didn't understand how blood functioned in the body and what it did as far as carrying the oxygen and all those important elements that it performs within the body itself. They now understand. And the Bible, thousands of years ago, is teaching that the blood is in the life, that life is in the blood. Blood clotting, right? Here's an interesting one, blood clotting. So go to Genesis chapter 17. So we know that every male born amongst God's people had to be circumcised on the 8th day. And in Genesis 17 verse 12 it reads, "And among you every man-child in your generations, he that is born in the house or bought with money, or any stranger which is not of thy seed, and he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised," at the start of that verse. So 8 days old, what we now know, what science knows in regards to blood clotting, now God prescribed to do it on the 8th day, circumcise every male child. When it comes to blood clotting, it reaches its peak for every newborn infant on day 8. Exactly on day 8, when it would be suitable to circumcise. Before then, the child could potentially bleed out. So because it's done day 8, what it is, it's to do with vitamin K levels. Blood clotting in newborn reaches its peak on that day. It's when coagulating factors in the blood are at optimal levels. How did they know that? They could not possibly know that. That is not, once again, it's divine. It's an example of just the divine knowledge that they had access to through God's word. Once again, science slowly catching up to the Bible. Now, once again with biology, something else I want to look at here is the laws of hygiene in the Bible. And this is interesting. Throughout history, we have had so many plagues, so many infectious diseases that have sometimes killed thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people at a time, particularly with like the Black Death, which was, my understanding is it wiped out more than 40% of the Earth's population, just this one plague, which is astonishing. That's a monumental number of people. But in Leviticus chapter 15, verse 13, now keep in mind, this is written 3,500 years ago. And when he that hath an issue is cleansed of his issue, then he shall number to himself 7 days for his cleansing, and wash his clothes, and bathe his flesh in running water, and shall be clean. The Bible is very specific here about using running water. There is a really big difference between using water that's sitting still to clean yourself versus running water. Now, in modern times, we're accustomed to having access to running water. It's in all of our homes. It's just running through those pipes, right? When you turn the tap on, that water is running water. Now, it's something pretty simple, but with major consequences. So the Bible here is teaching when dealing with disease that it should be running water. Now, up until the 1800s, doctors would clean tools just in dishes of still water and reuse them. Right? Crazy. Like now we know, right? In modern times, we know how dangerous this is when it comes to infection. And in 1845, this was, I believe it was in Vienna, so this was in Italy. The death rate of some women in hospitals giving birth was as high as 30%. So the women would have been safer actually doing home births, but because they were going to these hospitals where the doctors were reusing these implements that were just being washed in still water, their risk of death because of infection skyrocketed. 30% is, that's scary. If you were a woman in those days going to a hospital and having a 30% chance of dying, I wouldn't be going to the hospital. I'd be opting, I'd be asking my wife to offer the home birth instead of going to the hospital. But this was their normal practice until they understood the presence of microscopic diseases in modern times. And what one doctor did at the time, because he was seeing this explosion of this death rate because of the women going to these hospitals all in the same place and doctors using the same implements and not washing anything under running water, he immediately instructed that all the doctors wash their hands before any examinations, so introduced a bit more cleanliness in the environment. And obviously if they were using running water, which they must have been using at that point, the death rate dropped from 30 to 2%. It went from 3 in 10 to like 2 in 100. And here it is in the Bible, instructing the use of running water for cleanliness, this hygiene, right? Thousands of years ahead of its time. And what this demonstrates is if there's something in the Bible that you're not sure of why it's there or why God has commanded a certain thing and it might seem strange to your ears, just trust it. Just trust it. You don't necessarily need to know the ins and outs and the reasons why. You might come to that understanding at some point, but you might not. Like there are some people that have lived throughout history that have never come to the knowledge that we have available to us today. And that's another thing. Don't take that for granted either, the access to some of this knowledge that we have today. Quarantine is another thing. So Leviticus chapter 13, verse 46. Once again, this is 3,500 years old. All the days wherein the plague shall be in him, he shall be defiled, he is unclean. He shall dwell alone, without the camp shall his habitation be. So the Bible's teaching here when there's a plague, some kind of infectious disease in the population, whoever has the disease or infection should be dwelling alone outside the camp. What if you're married? Too bad. That is what the Bible's teaching. So for the preservation of the others in the community, in the camp, you are to move outside the camp when you have disease, some kind of infection that can spread. Once again, the Bible is way ahead of its time here. Had, the people during, say, the Black Death or the bubonic plague or any of these kinds of infectious diseases practiced this, hundreds of thousands of lives would have been saved. People would have lived much longer. The average life expectancy wouldn't have been as low as it was during the Black Death or the bubonic plague. And this is an ancient quarantine law that the Bible's prescribing here, so far ahead of its time. And, people were even superstitious. Like during the Black Death or these plagues, they were so superstitious that they attributed some of these epidemics to like evil spirits, bad air. It was bad air, okay, all right, but they just didn't understand. Had they just obeyed this commandment of the Lord, they would have saved themselves a lot of heartache. All right, so I want to move on to something that's sort of interesting here, something that's a little bit more fun and I think lighthearted. Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs. Everybody, kids love talking about dinosaurs. But when it comes to dinosaurs, I believe the Bible talks about them. It doesn't use the word dinosaur. It certainly describes them. And dinosaur is just a modern word used to describe large lizards and large birds that have been dug up in recent times as fossils. These creatures existed. I don't believe God would trick humanity. Like, there are stumbling blocks for people, don't get me wrong, but I don't think he would trick humanity by deliberately burying the fossils of these animals that never existed. All right? I don't believe that for a second. And the Bible uses the word dragon. It also uses the word behemoth to describe a large land-based animal. It uses the word leviathan, describing a very large sea creature. I think these are all types of dragons. Dinosaurs is what we call them in modern times. But have a look. Let's go to Job chapter 40. Job chapter 40, verse 15. I don't think you can honestly read this description in the Bible and not think that this is talking about a dinosaur. Behold now behemoth, which I made with thee, he eateth grass as an ox. So he eats the grass like an ox. He's not a meat eater, this particular animal. Lo now, his strength is in his loins, and in his force is in the navel of his belly. He moveth his tail like a cedar. I don't know if you know what a cedar is, but a cedar is a tree. It can grow quite large. So if you could picture a land-based animal that eats grass, that's got this massive tail like the size of a cedar tree that it swings around, the image that I get in my head, and it's what you see in those museums, are those big dinosaurs that have got those massive tails and often long necks so they can reach foliage or eat the grass. His bones are as strong pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. In Jeremiah 49, verse 33, it mentions dragons and their dwelling place here. It says, and Hazor shall be a dwelling for dragons. This is in Jeremiah, and a desolation forever. There shall no man abide there, nor any son of man dwell in it. What the Bible is teaching here is that we dwelt amongst these creatures at one point in the not too distant past. And even if you want to look this up and check this out, they have found DNA in these fossilized remains of some of these animals, which allegedly is not possible if they are millions of years old. It's not possible. Isaiah 27 verse 1, in that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. So what I believe this is teaching here is there's this big sea creature, which is a dragon that is in the sea. Its habitat is in the ocean. Once again, these fossils have been found of these gigantic sea creatures that existed in the past. What we're led to believe with some of these modern day scientists is that they're millions and millions of years old. They went extinct millions and millions of years old. Yet here they are in the Bible, being described perfectly thousands of years before their fossils are even dug up. So, and when you look at different cultures around the world, there are so many different cultures that have stories, dragon stories, stories of dragons. Now, sure, they could be exaggerated. They might not be all that accurate. This is accurate. We've got accurate descriptions in here of these creatures. This is true. So when you read some of these cultures and the stories they have about these animals, there probably is some truth to it, but there's probably also a lot of exaggeration as well. Now, the pterodactyl is an example of a giant flying lizard. I mean, to me, that's your dragon. That's like your mythical dragon. Now, it's not only it's fire breathing, right? That's where the exaggeration can come in. But it was a giant flying lizard. At least that's what they believe when they try and put together the image of this creature from only the bones that they have, right? Like, who knows exactly what this thing looked like. But once again, here's the Bible describing these dinosaurs. But we've called them dinosaurs in modern times. The Bible calls them dragons. All right. Here's another interesting topic, fasting. Fasting. So we're going to, not too much longer to go here, guys, so bear with me. Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4. Verse 1. Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward and hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. But he answered and said, It is written, Man shall not live by bread alone, but every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. So here we see Jesus goes on this fast for 40 days and 40 nights. Now that is a long fast. I've never done that, right? I've done some fasting, but nothing of that length. But here he's doing this. Now, fasting, when it comes to the Bible, its primary application biblically is a spiritual application. And in fact, if we look at Matthew 17, you don't need to turn there, but this is where the disciples, they were trying to exorcise a demon out of somebody and they couldn't do it. They prayed, but they could not exorcise this demon. And Jesus, when they asked Jesus, like, why couldn't we cast this demon out, this devil out? Why couldn't we do it? Howbeit this kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting. So they could have prayed all they wanted without exorcising this devil. Jesus is saying, you've got to fast as well. So there are some things that can only be conquered spiritually through both prayer and fasting. That's the primary, I believe, the primary application of fasting biblically. The reason why you would go on a fast spiritually is to conquer devils, whatever form they might be in, right? And we are in a spiritual warfare here. We're not fighting against flesh and blood. Just because we can't see the spiritual warfare doesn't mean it's not there, that it doesn't exist. It's there. We're fighting against principalities and powers in dark places. So when it comes to fasting, that's the primary purpose. However, what I want to show you this morning is that it's only in recent times the benefits of fasting have been found medically, like the benefits. So biologically, it has huge benefits. So what happens is when you go on a fast, after 24 hours, you'll enter into, what happens is the bad cells in your body working, you've got food moving through that it's processing. When you go on a fast, it gives its opportunity to regenerate and heal. So this is the biological benefits of a fast. You can help reduce the risk of heart disease, diabetes, cancer, It can protect brain health, strengthen the immune system. All of this, so autophagy has been known of for about 50 years, but it's only as recently as the 1990s when they recognised through research the medical benefits, the biological benefits. So this is something that the Bible prescribes all through, taught thousands of years ago, and there it is. It's beneficial. And Jesus, he even tells us when we go on a fast not to emaciate ourselves or try and make ourselves look like we're having a hard time and woe is me. No, he says pour oil on your head. Like and I think this is representative of your body regenerating, giving it some rest and time to heal. Now, when it comes to other religious texts versus the Bible, when it comes to science, there are really blatant, obvious errors in other religious texts where they just make false statements about the nature of the universe and about creation. Now, I mentioned archaeology as something that confirms the Bible. Now, this is not so with, say, the Book of Mormon. All of the events and cities and places and everything described in the Book of Mormon, most of it's proven false just through archaeology. Whereas the Bible stands up. There's not one single archaeological dig that has contradicted the Bible and those historical cities and the events that took place. Scientific errors can be found in the Hindu scriptures. It's a really long list. I'm not going to read out the whole list, but it teaches that the sun revolves around the earth, geocentric solar system. The moon is bigger than the sun. Now, when you look at it in the sky, you can see why they came up with this and why it's written. But now that we have modern technology, we know that that's false. It's just because the sun's further away. The sun's much bigger than the moon. It teaches some silly things like the earth is supported by 4 elephants on the back of a turtle. Whereas the Bible's teaching it's hung in space by nothing, right? Vast contrast. Islam, it's the same. It's got similar errors, scientific errors in the Quran, teaching similar falsehoods as the Hindu teachings. It even teaches that the moon split. Now, that's just not true. Like, the moon has always been whole. There's no evidence in history that the moon ever split. And if that did happen, how did it go back together again? There's just a lot of things that are just false claims in these other religious texts. What I want to do now is just conclude, just to sum up. Like I said, these are not things that we really want to debate and get into arguments with people over, but you can have sometimes opportunities to open a door when you can point something out like this and to get the gospel in, to get somebody to just, I went out soul winning with, can you grab some, my mouth's going dry. Thanks, Jace. You mind getting some water? I went out soul winning with Michael yesterday, and there was one individual in particular, Justin, who was very closed off initially, but just by pointing out some logical things to him initially when it comes to creation, it opened the door a little bit. He was very resistant, but it just opened the door slightly, and I was able to get in a few Bible verses and share part of the gospel with him. And Michael and I, we both recognized and noticed that his whole mindset from being so resistant initially changed. He was really giving it some serious thought, when it comes to salvation, Jesus Christ dying for his sins, the gospel. But he was initially extremely closed off. But I just made some simple points, and just one of them was when it comes to the creation, there's a lot of people that teach that non-living matter produced intelligence. It makes zero sense. Now, as soon as I made that comment to him, that statement to him, he thought about it, and the resistance started to disappear a little bit. Now, here's the thing. That's just my wisdom, right? That's not going to save the guy. But it can sometimes help open the door, give the opportunity where you can now break the ice, you've broken the ice, and give the gospel. There's a lot of people out there in this day and age that have been fooled by science falsely so called, which is what this sermon's about. They're blinded. It's one of Satan's tools. It's one of his devices that he uses to blind people so that they don't overcome the world. And it is our job. We ought to be persuasive sort of people. Paul to me was somebody that was very persuasive, but even he hammers home the point that he doesn't preach about the wisdom of the Greeks and he doesn't preach about the signs and wonders for the Jews. He preached Christ and him crucified. Because there are a lot of people that do go on a crusade with this sort of stuff. In fact, they dedicate entire ministries to creation, science, and neglect the gospel, right? The primary application for us is giving the gospel to people. I just really want to make that point. Thank you for your time, guys. Let's pray.